I'm going to suggest to you that the legends of the ancient Greeks embody the truth of what really happened in the past, that there were these strange creatures generating hybrids that the Greek called Titans.
And isn't it interesting the way Hollywood is beating this drum about the return of the Titans? Thanos, the Mad Titan, Sam Worthington, who was in Clash of the Titans and Wrath of the Titans, starred in a movie last year, went straight to Netflix, called The Titan, and the new Godzilla movie, where they have rebranded them. They're no longer Mutos, which is what, monsters of unusual size or whatever. They rebranded them as the Titans, the original and rightful rulers of Earth. Because again, presenting them as Titans, the original and rightful rulers of the Earth. The Titans are still around. In fact, I argue in my book, Last Clash of the Titans, that they are somehow still influencing things on this Earth, even though they are currently chained in the abyss. Revelation 9 says they're going to get out for 5.5 months at the end. When the Nephilim return, and we understand that the Nephilim, the spirits of the Nephilim that were destroyed in the days of Noah, in the flood, were barred entrance into the afterlife, into the netherworld, into heaven, basically condemned to roam the earth. That was the belief of the early church. That was the belief of the Jews in the time of Jesus and through all, the Old Testament period. It wasn't until Augustine in about the 5th century that belief went away. He also basically turned the church away from believing that the Nephilim had been created at all. Ezekiel, though, saw it. And this is the thing. God bless people like L.A. Marzulli who've been, teaching this for a long time. He's right. The Nephilim are returning. Where I differ with L.A., and I've got to give him credit, because without him and his book Nephilim, which was a novel that got me down this path, I wouldn't be here right now. But I think Ezekiel 39 is a clue, but you got to understand the worldview of the prophets to understand what Ezekiel was writing. In Ezekiel 39, he's writing about the culmination of the war of Gog and Magog, and Gog was the Old Testament Antichrist figure. Okay, he is the figure that John in the book of Revelation calls the Antichrist. That is the same war that culminates with the Battle of Armageddon, which is fought for the Har Moed, God's Mount of Assembly, which is Zion, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Ezekiel says, God said that he will prepare a place in Israel for burial of Magog, the forces of Magog. The Valley of the Travelers east of the sea, refers to east of the Dead Sea, and it will block the travelers. The key is understanding that travelers in the Old Testament concept, the Old Testament world, were spirits that would travel or cross over from one plane of existence to another. In other words, the realm of the dead to the land of the living. And the places where he identifies east of the Dead Sea are places that during the Exodus, the stations of the Exodus, refer to a couple of places that are named for these interactions with the spirit realm. One of the stops in the Exodus, one of the stations of the Exodus is called Ovoth, which means spirits of the dead. It's based on a root word Ov, which means medium. The medium of Endor that Saul went to see was the Ov of Endor. In fact, one of the giants killed by David's men, Ishbi, they condense the word. Ishbi Benab is how it looks to us in English. Ishbi Ben Ov. Ishbi, son of the necromancer, son of the medium. And he was of the descendants of the Rapha, the sons of the Rephaim. The Rephaim were these spirits that the Amorites, the Canaanites, believed were the spirits of the mighty men who were of old, the ancestors of their kings. They were called in Canaanite texts, called by scholars the Rephaim texts, written about the time of the Judges, where these Rephaim were summoned through necromancy rituals to the tabernacle of El, Mount Hermon, where El, they believed, would speak words of revivification to resurrect these spirits that were called warriors of Baal. And in these texts, they're described as warriors. They mount their chariots and they travel first one day and then another. And at dawn of the third day, they arrive to be resurrected. Like Jesus, who went down and preached and proclaimed to the spirits in prison until dawn of the third day, when he arrived, except that he really was resurrected. And Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 39 says, this is where these travelers will be buried. Another one of the stops on the, in fact, the mountain where Moses was led by God to get his only view of the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Climb this mountain of the Avarim. In Hebrew, that means travelers.
And we see Zeus in many forms. We see Atlas and Hercules. Atlas and Hercules from Greek mythology were what would be called in the Hebrew Nephilim, offspring of an intermarriage between a god and a woman. And so now these legends we obviously see in the Sumer culture, in Assyria, in Egypt. I'll show you a few things. In the Incas, the Mayan, the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the Persian mythology, and certainly in the Greek mythology, which most of us as products of Western civilization are familiar with. Also in India, Bolivia, South Sea Islands. Every one of these cultures, and the American Indians, every one of these cultures have legends of the star people. These people that came, these gods or demigods, whatever, came and cohabited with women and produced hybrids. I discover from some apparent experts in the American Indian culture that this business of holding a hand up saying how, that's Hollywood. But what apparently was the practice when they met a stranger was to hold up the hand so they could count fingers. They had a terror of the six-fingered people. And if you go to the ruins at Chaca, New Mexico, they have one of the exhibits there that you want to take a look at, the famous pictographs. And among those pictographs, you'll find the fearsome six-fingered hand as part of that. I came across something else that's kind of, the Pawnee Indians have an account that Bill, you remember Buffalo Bill? Real name was William Cody. He wrote his autobiography in 1920. Very colorful guy. You can get his book, it's popular. But there's an interesting quote in his book by Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody, published in 1920. He says, while we were in the Sandhills scouting the Niobrara country, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians said the bones were those of a race of people who long ago had lived in that country. They said these people were 3 times the size of a man of the present day, and they were so swift and strong that they could run by the side of a buffalo and, taking the animal in one arm, could tear off a leg and eat it as they ran. I don't know what to make of that. It's in his autobiography.
Have you ever wondered if there's more to the story of the Egyptian gods than what we were taught in school? What if these ancient deities weren't gods at all, but something much darker, something deceptive and dangerous? There's a hidden side to Egyptian mythology that rarely gets talked about. Today, we're diving into the unsettling truth behind the so-called gods of Egypt and what they might really be. Egyptian gods are actually mentioned in the Bible and not in a positive light. In fact, God makes it very clear how he feels about them. In Exodus 12:12, it says, "For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, and will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am the Lord." During the 10 plagues of Egypt, each one wasn't just a punishment to Pharaoh. They were direct attacks on specific Egyptian gods. These weren't coincidences. Each plague exposed the weakness of a god the Egyptians worshipped. For example, the plague of darkness was likely aimed at Ra, the sun god. What better way to challenge the god of the sun than to blot out the light completely? The plague of frogs may have targeted Hecate, a fertility goddess with a frog head. God was making a clear statement. These so-called gods have no power before him. But let's go even deeper. Where did these gods come from in the first place? The Egyptian pantheon was formed over thousands of years, shaped by local beliefs, natural elements, and societal changes along the Nile River. Early Egyptians personified everything: animals, the sun, the river, even abstract concepts like order and chaos. Each region had its own local deity. As these regions united, their gods merged into one system. That's how we got gods like Osiris, the god of the afterlife, Isis, goddess of magic and motherhood, and Set, god of chaos and war. These beings represented more than just nature. They embodied cosmic order, death and rebirth, even royal power. Temples were built in their honor, rituals were performed daily, and their images were carved into stone all across Egypt. But here's the question: Were these really just metaphors and myth, or did people worship something very real and very dangerous? According to the Bible, these gods are not imaginary, they're false, but that doesn't mean they weren't real beings. God says, "You shall have no other gods before me," in Exodus 20:3. That's not just a warning, it's a declaration that others existed, but they were not worthy of worship. So, who or what were they? This is where it starts to align with something far more sinister. Many believe these Egyptian gods were not gods at all, but fallen angels, spiritual entities that rebelled against the true God. These fallen angels, once heavenly beings, took on the form of gods and began deceiving humanity. They presented themselves as protectors, creators, and rulers, but their real purpose was to lead people away from the truth. This isn't just theory, it connects directly to the Book of Enoch, an ancient text that describes how a group of angels called the Watchers descended to earth. These angels taught humans forbidden knowledge, sorcery, astrology, weapon making, and all forms of dark magic. They corrupted humanity from the inside out. And guess what? Ancient Egypt was known for its obsession with magic and the afterlife. Spells, curses, incantations, and rituals were part of everyday life. Does that sound like something godly or something demonic? Let's look at Anubis, for example. He's often called the god of death or the god of the underworld. His jackal-headed image is iconic, but in many ways, he seems more like a demonic gatekeeper than a divine guide. Anubis oversaw the embalming process and led souls to the afterlife, often depicted standing next to scales weighing a human heart against a feather. But his domain was the underworld, a place eerily similar to Sheol, Hades, or even hell in other spiritual traditions. Another one is Thoth, god of wisdom and magic. He was credited with giving writing to mankind and teaching sacred knowledge. But that's exactly what the Book of Enoch said the fallen angels did. They gave humans forbidden wisdom that led to spiritual destruction. That's not divine help, that's deception. Even the physical appearance of the Egyptian gods raises red flags. Many of them were hybrids, part animal, part human. Horus with a falcon head, Sobek with a crocodile head, Bastet as a cat. These combinations sound a lot like the biblical cherubim, beings described in the Bible as having multiple faces: human, lion, ox, and eagle. These aren't cartoon angels, they're terrifying hybrid beings of great power. The serpent imagery is another major red flag. Some Egyptian deities like Wadjet are associated with serpents, but in the Bible, the serpent is the very symbol of deception and rebellion. In Genesis, it was the serpent who caused the fall of humanity. So when you see snake symbolism in Egyptian religion, it's hard not to connect the dots. Now here's something to really think about. What if many ancient religions were all talking about the same beings, just with different names? The Greek gods, the Roman gods, the Mesopotamian deities, they all share common traits. Sun gods, death gods, tricksters, storm gods. Could they all trace back to the same group of fallen angels, manifesting differently depending on the culture? If so, then Egyptian mythology wasn't just a religion. It was a system of spiritual deception. A grand illusion set up by beings who wanted to replace God, receive worship, and control civilizations. That could explain why God was so forceful with Egypt, why he didn't just free his people, but also tore down every symbol of Egyptian power in the process. Remember, the war in heaven described in Revelation tells us that Lucifer and his angels were cast out. So where did they go? To earth. And what did they do? Set up their kingdoms, their temples, their fake thrones, and they demanded worship. That's what makes this so serious. We're not just talking about myth or history. We're talking about a long-standing spiritual war, one that began before humans were even created and continues to this day. And the Egyptian gods, they might be some of the oldest players in that war. So the next time you see ancient statues, pyramids, or hieroglyphs depicting Ra, Anubis, or Isis, ask yourself, were these really divine beings trying to help mankind? Or were they fallen angels using power and deception to lead people away from the one true God? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe the Egyptian gods were ever gods at all, or something much darker?
Fallen angels have an eerie similarity with Greek gods and gods of other cultures as well. The first major similarity is explained to us in one of the forgotten books of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch elaborates deeper into who the angels actually were in the Book of Genesis. But when we're told about their giant offsprings, things begin to get eerie. We're told that angels known as the Watchers had massive offsprings with human women. These beings were giants, and they are known as the Nephilim. This is extremely similar to the story of how demigods in Greek mythology came to be. As I've mentioned before, demigods are created when a god or goddess has a child with a human being. This is the very same sequence that is required in order for a Nephilim giant to be made.